Hi, I'm Karen MacNeil, author of The Wine Bible and editor of Wine Speed, and I own Karen MacNeil Company. Boy, sometimes I feel like we're spinning too many plates on too few poles, but we do a lot of projects. They are either in the field of writing, literary projects, sometimes simple articles for magazines, but also very substantial books that take years to do. We do a lot of projects for outside clients, law firms, hotels, universities, where we not only put together wine lists for those entities, but also help them in their entertaining with wine. So at all points, I suppose, in the calendar, we have, I don't know, what seems like way too many clients to take on. But, you know, when you have your own business, it's just the way. You know, wine writing in America today is really at a very interesting juncture because on the one hand, there are a lot of wine writers, but I hate to say it, there aren't a lot of really great wine writers. So I think it's a very open field for new talent. And it's open for a couple of reasons. One is that much of the great wine writing of the past, of course, began in Britain. But I think these days there's truly an American style of wine writing, and so sort of the doors are wide open. Here's why I said that maybe a lot of wine writing isn't as good as it could be, and that's because many people think or confuse subject expertise with writing. A lot of people really know about wine. I mean, I know myself, so dozens, maybe hundreds of sommeliers, for example, who really know wine. But being a subject expert doesn't mean that you're good at writing about it, right? Being a good writer assumes two talents. One is, yes, knowing your stuff in terms of wine, but you also have to be a really good writer. And being a really good writer is hard to do. It's agonizing, as we all know, from having been a teenager and being forced by an English teacher to write essay after essay. So those people who are good wine writers, I think, not only are on top of their wine knowledge, but they've really trained themselves to be good writers as well. Well, this is really a question I've never been asked, so you're the first to know that I actually tried to write my first book when I was 11, and it was on the stock market. You can imagine, right? I mean, I think some things do choose you, you don't choose them. I think a lot of us in wine feel that way. We feel like wine chose us. But for me, writing also chose me, and so I wanted to be a writer even as a child, even before I knew how to do it. Interestingly, though, I've never taken a writing class. The Wine Bible is the best-selling wine book in the US, but I've never taken a writing class. I did, however, collect 324 rejection slips. When I started out, when I moved as a young woman to New York to try and become a writer. So after 324 rejection slips, I guess finally I must have been able to figure out how to, piece a few paragraphs together.
Now when you say rejection slips, it's approaching a magazine outlet or a publication, and you mean?
So in those days, when I started trying to be a writer, you did do exactly that. I mean, if you knew an editor, you could pitch ideas. But often, if you were brand new, you had to write a piece, or at least write part of a piece, and send it in. And so I was writing in those days about everything: poetry, politics, women's issues, social issues. And trying to get published in everything from, the New York Times to an airline magazine. So it was pretty painful. In fact, I kept all those rejection slips and pinned them up, thumbtacked them to the wall of my 5th floor walk-up in Spanish Harlem in New York. Yeah, you know, when I wrote the Wine Bible, it took, the first edition took 10 years to write, 10 unpaid years actually, because it was global. It covered the world, so it of course took a long time to write. But in those days, a lot of writing was this sort of heavily British writing that was A, pretty dry, I felt, and B, it seemed like it came right out of, I don't know, the British school system circa 1950. And much of wine writing back then was also stripped of everything that we all love about it. You know, there was no culture, food, history, religion, art. I mean, one of the things I think that we who love wine love about it is the tapestry of it, the richness of it. And so I was determined to put all that stuff rightfully back into the book. And people tell me all the time, one of the things they love about the Wine Bible is just picking it up anywhere and reading some crazy little side box on the correct way to twirl pasta in Tuscany or something. In fact, a funny story about this is when I was writing the 2nd edition, which came out a couple of years ago, I got a call from my editor, and I happened to be in Mendoza, and she said, where are you? Where am I reaching you? And I said, I'm in Mendoza and I don't have very much time because I'm about to take a tango lesson. And she said, Karen, it's a book about wine. And I said, you know, I really don't think you can understand Malbec until you understand the tango. And she laughed and shook her head and said, okay, right? But that, I really believe that. I really believe that wine at its best is connected to other art forms and other parts of culture in its place. And if you can capture that in writing, which is what I'm always trying to do, it touches you. It's a hard thing to teach yourself to write well, but I'm pretty convinced that almost everyone who does write well ultimately is self-taught. And I think you have to essentially turn the binoculars around. When many people sit down to write, they say to themselves, what do I want to say? And I don't do it that way. I sit down and I think, what can this person hear? What would be fascinating to this person? And it's a slight difference, but it's an important difference, right? Because when you sit down to tell someone everything you know, almost always you write too much. You write too much, it might come out a little bit pedantic, it might come out, I don't know, a little too stuffy or egotistical. But if instead you say to yourself, what is this person, what could this person hear? What would be fascinating to them? Then you're more likely to just find that little nugget of something great that the person really does want to read and take away with them. I've always kept for 30 years beside my desk a file folders just called interesting stuff. And into that folder could go any number of, you wouldn't believe the craziness in there. And cocktail napkins with stuff on them, advertisements, and every now and then I take that out and I look at all of these things that just got thrown in there. And often from that will come a very interesting article, something that no one else has thought of. I also believe, by the way, that good writing starts with good creative thinking. And when if you're starting out, this is especially important because you can't go to the New York Times and say, I want to write an article about the Rhone. Well, yeah, you too, and Eric Asimov and everybody else, right? But I remember one of my first pieces for the New York Times trying to break in, this was a long time ago. I thought, well, it's going to be hard to break in on wine. Let me break in on food. Food's pretty hard too, but I pitched the editor on an article called Where the Cops Eat, on the idea that, listen, who better than neighborhood cops to know all of the great hole-in-the-wall, great places to eat in New York? That was, if I had pitched the New York Times on, let me go to Le Bernardin and write this fabulous restaurant review, there would have been no chance. But Where the Cops Eat was a pretty good, fun way to get in, right? And so I'm always trying to sort of, again, think backwards, think of a clever, different angle that a magazine or an editor just can't refuse. I'm not sure that today it's possible for young writers to go after the big publications because you really do need a track record. Unless you're just a brilliant natural writer who galvanizes this editor with even your first few sentences. So I think it's better to not drive yourself crazy as I did and collect all those rejection slips. It's better to start small and build a portfolio of great, diverse, interesting pieces that you get paid for, by the way. It's a real mistake to want to write so badly that you decide to do it for free, because free work doesn't send the right signal. Writers already don't make very much money, so you should join the rest of us not making very much money by writing, but don't write for free. Free signals you as an absolute amateur, and it doesn't appeal to editors. In fact, just the opposite. So I would write short, creatively, for money, and for small publications first. Food and wine pairing is really a very interesting field because most people will say, the Europeans do this so well, food and wine pairing. Food and wine pairing did not start in Europe. Food and wine pairing is absolutely an American idea. It started in the 1980s, actually started here in the Napa Valley. Because if you think about it, right, no Italian grandmother stopped to analyze the acidity in the pasta sauce before she just plunked a jug of wine on the table. The Europeans ate from a very small repertoire of available foods and a small repertoire of locally made wines. So you could say that food and wine pairing was maybe built in for them, but it was very different than the idea that we have today, which is, you could go into any wine store and there could be, 1,200 different types of wine. For dinner, you might make anything from, Asian stir fry to lasagna, right? Just the world of possibility is now so enormous in America that we here really had to be the place that began to think about, well, what does go with what, even if they didn't traditionally go together? Does German wine go with Southeast Asian cooking, right? Maybe that's not such a bad idea. But for me, I started the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America's wine program. I'm the chairman emeritus of that program. And in that process, I would, with CIA chefs, we would all the time, very painstakingly, do food and wine exact pairings, with what we called component tastings. What does a red bell pepper taste like against Gruner Veltliner? What does a red bell pepper taste like against Chateauneuf du Pape? These were crazy. There'd be 150 variables before and we weren't even at the finished dish yet, right? All of that training and experimenting gave me good inclinations, but in the end, I'm very liberal when it comes to food and wine pairing. In fact, I believe that in many circumstances, it's more important to match wine to mood than it is to match wine to food. Yes, I'm so excited about WineSpeed. It's a product that I started about 2 years ago now, and it is a free digital newsletter. I think of it, I want it to be the single best wine newsletter in the country. And the thinking was that, here's the Wine Bible. It's pretty big, it's 1,000 pages, it's authoritative, it's dense with facts, but it's a book. And increasingly, of course, wine communication is getting faster and shorter. And I wanted, initially as a challenge to myself, to see if I could do both, if I could deliver, something big and substantial like the Wine Bible, but also be really at the top of my game in really fast, great wine information. Most of what's short and fast, or at least 2 years ago, much of what was short and fast wasn't very authoritative. It wasn't very good. And so that's been my mission, is to make something that's fascinating, clever, free, fast, but that is chock full of really great wine information. So WineSpeed is, it's easy to sign up. You just go to winespeed.com. I would say about half of our we have 40,000 subscribers, about half of them are in the business, are sommeliers or winemakers or people in the trade, and about half are really avid consumers. And it's great because people write in questions to me. We do wine quizzes, we do videos. It's super fun, and it just comes to your inbox every Friday. It takes less time to read than it takes to open a bottle of wine. When I moved from New York City, from really the center of Manhattan to the Napa Valley, that was a little shocking. But when I did, in the mid-90s, I left New York on the sheer belief, no evidence, but the sheer belief that I would become a better wine writer if I lived in close proximity to grapevines, just through osmosis somehow. And no one had ever suggested to me that that was true. A lot of my London colleagues didn't feel like they needed to live next to a grapevine. But I think it has proven true. I think, when you live in an agricultural community, it doesn't have to be Napa, of course, but when you live near agriculture, you too, even if you're not the one picking the grapes or making the wine, you're caught up in the whole energy of it, in the fretting about it. You remember weather really intensely. When I was in New York, I didn't really remember the weather. I wasn't counting the number of days over 95 because I was worried for the grapevines, right? It's a different way of participating with your environment. And when you participate with your environment, intimately like that, I think it creeps into your wine writing in a positive way. I think Australian wine deserves to be both better known and more correctly known, if I can say it that way. You know, I'm probably guilty of this too, that we tasted a bunch of Australian wine, let's say a few years ago. I'm talking about the general public. And then we made some assumptions about it. But I bet a lot of those assumptions aren't really correct anymore. Australia is a very forward-thinking, very vital wine region, and it defies really whatever stereotypes were formed about it 25 years ago. Lately, we've had a number of Australian winemakers come and visit us here in our office and taste with us, and I've been knocked out. I mean, I myself am guilty of not really being as, I think, thoughtful and correct about the state of the Australian wine industry today. But of course, that's true everywhere, right? So many exciting things are happening in every country, hence Wine Bible 3. My name is Karen MacNeil. Thanks so much for tuning in to SommelierBusiness.com. See you again.